Have you ever had an idea that you think, that's not going to work? That's too simple. What I'm going to talk to you about today is how a very, very simple idea went global. You see, my staff think I'm very dangerous when I travel because I've got form. It's the only time I have to read. So they know if I get on a plane, I'm going to get off with another great idea. Anyway, I'm on this plane and I'm reading an Economist article that says that the Brits are only productive for 2.5 hours a day. Any Canadians here? Yeah, a few at the back. They're only productive for 1.5 hours a day. Now that got me thinking, why? And does that apply to my business? So let's think about your working day. You go into the office, you have a cup of coffee, you have a chat, you do some emails, a little bit of social media, get down to do some work. And then somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, can you help me with this? I love this. If somebody keeps disturbing you at work, it's the equivalent of a 10-point drop in your IQ or you operating under the influence of marijuana. So, you then get back to work, you have a bit more coffee, a bit more emails, you then take the call from that elusive plumber you've been chasing all week. More calls, crisis with the kids. Bit more calls, bit more work, bit more emails. Now, think about this. This is happening on your boss's time, my time. So I thought, what if I gave my staff a day off a week in return for them delivering the same amount of productivity over 4 days? Because if you think about it, if you are only productive for 2.5 hours a day, you only have to get another 45 minutes in each of those 4 days. Canadians at the back, of course, only need to do 18 minutes a day. So, get off the plane, sent my head of HR an email. I said, I've got a great idea. Let's do a 4-day week. I got no response. I thought, that's strange. I found out when I got back to the office, she deleted the email, had decided she was going to tell me it was stuck in the firewall and she was hoping I'd forgotten. But I'm smarter than the average bear. I'd written a note. So I get back to the office and I said, okay, 4-day week. She said, there is no way I am going to tell our staff we're reducing their work week. I said, it's way better than that. They only have to work for 4 days and I'm going to pay them for 5. And at that point, her jaw hit the floor. So when she picked it back up again, she said, I think we better tell the leadership team. They were, I have to say, equally unenthusiastic. I said, what's the worst that can happen? They gave me a pretty comprehensive list, frankly. And then they said, and how are we going to do it? And I said, I've got absolutely no idea. And then I had a brainwave. Let's ask the team, I said. So we challenged our team to think how they would work differently. Not just processes and procedures, but how they would manage their time differently. And in return, if they delivered to me agreed productivity outputs, and if they maintained service standards, then I would gift them a day off a week on full pay, and they didn't have to work longer on the other 4 days. And we gave it a go. Now, I knew this was going to be controversial. It was made slightly more controversial because I forgot to tell the board in advance. That was a really tough board meeting, let me tell you. And so what we did is we got a couple of independent researchers from two Auckland universities to work with us to see what would happen when we implemented a 4-day week. So what happened? Well, nothing. Well, nothing bad happened. Productivity actually stayed the same overall. Went up marginally. But of course, that meant our staff were being 20% more productive on the days that they were working. But it was the other scores that absolutely blew us away. Engagement scores went up between 30 and 40%, to the highest level the researchers had ever seen in New Zealand. Stress levels dropped 15%. But the one that really got us was people said we're better able to handle our workload working 4 days, not 5. But we learned an awful lot more than that. We learned we actually worked better as a team. So I was talking to one of my guys. I said, James, how's it going? And he said, well, it's good. He said, but I'm having a bit of trouble with the wife. And I said, why? I thought, of course, it was because he was spending more time at home. And he said, we're looking for a house at the moment, and she keeps sending me property that she's found on the internet. Now, of course, that was also bitterly proving the point that she wasn't doing any work at her work. But he said, I've had to tell her, I am not prepared to look at these in the office anymore. Because if I do, I will not be able to look my colleagues in the eyes and say, I did everything possible to keep our 4-day. Now, we did some checking. We had a look at how much time people were spending on the 5 most popular websites. We would have expected a 20% drop. Usage dropped by 35%. So what people were saying was a day off a week was way more important than Facebook. Now, people were changing their behaviors. They were recognizing that the day off was a gift and it had to be earned. It wasn't something that you could just take for granted. And this gift is so substantial that it's changing the lives of our people. I've got a young woman in the team who's just got married. And her husband is a chef, he works weekends. So the day off a week meant that they could spend a day a week together, and that meant they could cement their relationship. This scheme means that our staff can be the best they can be in the office, but also the best they can be outside. And they embrace the change. Interestingly, so did the skeptical leadership team. And so we've now just made it permanent. Now, this started off as a local interest story, and then it went global. 37 countries, over 3,000 media articles, 10,000 social media posts, and a global audience that exceeds 4.2 billion people. You know you've made it when you are appearing on drive time Colombian radio. I also read a thing in the media last week, which was from an Indian magazine, and it described my company as an uber cool financial services company. Let me tell you, in the 130 years of the trust industry, nobody has ever described the industry as cool, let alone uber cool. So this is an issue that's transcending borders and cultures, from the Czech Republic to Canada to Korea, from the UK down to New Zealand. And what it says is the way that we work today isn't fit for purpose. It owes more to the 19th century than the 21st. Working 4 days a week radically changes lives. Working longer isn't about working smarter or harder. We found the 4-day week empowered our staff to make decisions, but also gave them a collective ownership of the future of work. It also levels the playing field between men and women. Women returning to work after a baby generally negotiate time off and get a reduction in pay. We now negotiate on productivity and output. Family time and shared care responsibilities are no longer just the preserve of women. They're equally available to men and women, and there is an expectation that you will use those and that it's okay to do so. And interestingly, we're doing that without the resorting to zero-hour contracts and the loss of hard-fought-for protections for employees. I've got a chap who tells the story of going to pick up his child from school for the first time ever. And she ran towards him, she flung her arms around him and said, "Daddy, what are you doing here?" You can't buy that, and you can never get it again. So imagine, what would happen to the world if we could take 20% of cars off the road? What does that mean for pollution? What does that mean for infrastructure? What does that mean for stress levels if you had more time to rest and reconnect? What does that do to anxiety and depression? Remembering, 1 in 5 of our workforce at any time have got a mental health or a stress issue. What if you could invest in yourself? That day off a week, you could spend time re-educating, training. How does that equip you for dealing with the impact of things like AI? Now, change is here. It's all around. And yet, we're glued to this 9 to 5, 5-day week, 19th century construct. It's time to change. The global interest says it's time to change. It really, really, really does matter. So let's do it. Because after all, what's the worst that can happen?